Hey, welcome back, Doug Pagitt Radio, broadcasting live out of the Twin Cities. It's our Wednesday show done on Friday, the Friday edition, with all of its Friday sort of sensibilities. We're going to be joined here in a moment by Efrem Smith. Efrem is the author of a book called The Post-Black and Post-White Church. And I guess we should tell people in full disclosure that that he used to be your pastor.
He did, twice.
Yep. On two different occasions he was your pastor?
He was a pastor at Park Avenue United Methodist Church during the time that I was a parishioner there.
Uh-huh.
And then after we left that church, we, for 3 months, went to the church that he left Park Avenue to start, Sanctuary.
Uh-huh.
We were there for 3 months.
Oh, and then he left there. He's a leaver.
Well, we left before he left.
You left. You guys are all a bunch of leavers.
Yep. It's big.
Quitters beget quitters.
Wandering.
Yeah, I love you folks.
Hello.
Hey, Efrem, Doug Pagitt.
Hey, man. How you doing?
Hi, buddy. Really good. And you're joined by Victoria Lynn, who's the
Hi,
sidekick here
Efrem.
on the show.
Hey, how's it going?
It's all right.
Hey, Victoria used to be one of your flock
At Park Avenue,
before she fell away.
back in the day. Before
Oh,
I was...
yeah, the old Park Avenue days.
Yeah, long time ago.
And at Sanctuary for a little bit before I became a part of Solomon's Porch. So good times. Hip Hop Sundays.
yeah,
Those were the
know,
best.
We lost so many people to Solomon's Porch, but it was an honor.
What, like all two
I'm
of us?
out of here.
You know, we like nothing
I'm
more
going
than a
to
bunch of
Solomon's
quitters
Porch.
around Solomon's Porch, so we're glad to have them, a bunch of leavers. And hey, Efrem, congratulations on this book, The Post-Black and the Post-White Church.
Oh, thanks, man. You know, you and I kind of talked about this idea back when, through the emergent group, you all had the book division with Baker.
Yep.
So, this had been something that I wanted to do for a long time.
Yeah, and I know you've been thinking about these ideas for a long time. In fact, way back from your own, early participation, I'm guessing, in ministry when you were at a church that was in a racially mixed neighborhood at Park Avenue Church in Minneapolis. You were thinking about, and a lot of other people were thinking about, the role of kind of your classic white church and classic African American churches in some really different ways, and partly maybe from your own history, but also from the changing culture that's going on and sort of a call of the gospel. So you've been thinking about this for a long time in the churches that you've worked at and the churches that you've started, and now you're are you the superintendent of the Pacific Conference for the Evangelical Covenant Church?
Yeah, that's right. So I oversee our churches in California, Arizona, Nevada, and Hawaii. So I guess for a Minnesota boy, that's not a bad gig.
Yeah, you picked up the Hawaii part. That's unbelievable. We should have done this. We should have done the interview like live from Maui. I think that really would have created some good action.
Yeah, we got to make sure that's what we do next time.
Yeah, that's perfect. So talk us through the book. What's your argument that there's a post-black and a post-white church?
Well, I think there's two things that I'm presenting in the book. One is the big phrase, the big tag word in church development and church leadership circles today is missional.
Yeah.
And so, Doug, you and I have kind of seen the conversation go from the word postmodern to the word missional. And, one of my arguments is that, the urban church and the development of multi-ethnic and multiracial movements that are church-based is the biggest sign, the most visible sign of a missional movement amongst the American church, i.e. the civil rights movement. So that's one of the things I'm presenting. I'm also presenting that, I don't think that the missional church model and the leadership development church models that are being presented today really capture the reality of the ever-increasing multi-ethnic, multiracial urbanization that's going on in the United States of America.
Right.
And so if we continue to talk about missional church models, even though I have great respect for Alan Hirsch and Mike Breen, we're still talking about, for the most part, European, Eurocentric, suburban, upper middle class zip code models.
Right.
For how you plant churches and how you develop them. And so I'm just trying to present one model that I think is more conducive to the current mission field in the United States.
So this title has a bit of provocative edge to it, right? The post-white and post-black church, and I'm guessing that it's more provocative for people when they hear the post-black church, for people that are inside of your kind of traditional or historic African American congregations. Is that the case?
Yeah, and that's why I took time in one of the chapters to honor the history and the legacy of the Black church, because there are some pastors, African American, who have pushed back at me and said, look, the Black church is still the anchor institution for African American leadership development, to be socially progressive and transformative in predominantly African American communities. So we can't lose the Black church. I understand that argument. At the same time, I feel like the Black church, one, was a forced church. So if it wasn't for the context of slavery and the position of the white church as a dominant religious force in the context of slavery and Jim Crow segregation, there would never have been the creation of a Black church in the first place. Two, through movements like the Civil Rights Movement and voices such as, pioneering evangelical Black voices such as John Perkins and Tom Skinner, that is one of the reasons we've seen the rise of the multi-ethnic church. I think that the prophetic voice of the Black church kind of laid the foundation for the case for a church that looks more like the kingdom of heaven.
This, and it sounds like the people that have a struggle maybe with this kind of language, and I what might be the similar people to for whom they struggle with people saying that we live in a post-racial society. Is that something of what you're trying to say, that we live in a world in which the racial distinctions and racial boundaries don't organize our lives in the same way?
Yeah, I'm not saying that. I think outside of that, I'm saying two things. One, race, as it has been developed, structured, and created the socialization of people, is not biblical. And I don't know how conducive the race construct is for a church that tears down walls of division. So race is not biblical, but because we are in a racialized matrix socially, race matters, as Dr. Cornel West said, and race is an issue. I just think the church could be the best laboratory, the best community setting in which race can be dismantled and reconciliation can be possible.
Yeah, and I think that's a very provocative notion, because for a lot of people, they feel like, look, we live in a really complex world. We live in a world in which the ethnic divisions aren't what they used to be. It's a postmodern thinking world. It's a multi-ethnic world. It's a very global kind of world. And people, when they're being frank, will say things like, but all of us need places where like all of that mix up isn't always happening, where things are just like they used to be. And for many people, churches play the role of safety and confirmation of ideas, not exploratory laboratories where you push boundaries and try to create new kinds of social order.
Yeah, the funny thing is, Doug, and this shouldn't be a provocative statement,
right,
but it probably is for many, especially evangelicals, is the first century church that we read about in Scripture actually did that. It pushed the boundaries of Jew and Gentile, and rich and poor, male and female. And so the social norms for what it meant to be female or Jewish or Samaritan were pushed and challenged. But yet the church in the United States actually begins as a place to enforce and support racial privilege and division and a class order. And this past presidential election showed us once again that evangelicals love to participate in reinforcing racial stereotypes, class orders, and kind of keeping people in their place in a social matrix. That's not the church Jesus talked about.
Talk a little bit more about that. How is it you think that evangelical sensibility likes to keep racial separating categories in play? What's going through your mind when you notice that?
Well, the schizophrenia of the evangelical church especially is that, one, we want to speak in a colorblind manner.
Uh-huh.
So I've been on evangelical Christian radio shows where the host will be disturbed with me when I use terms like African American, Asian American. He goes, "Well, we're all American. Why do you got to keep saying that? That's so divisive. We're in a colorblind world." And so they want to speak that, but then institutionally, we keep reinforcing C. Peter Wagner's homogeneous principle model at the same time. So institutionally, we purposely plant churches in homogeneous, suburban, predominantly white, upwardly mobile communities. And it's like, in many ways, the missional church plant movement is about pursuing safety in like third ring suburbs most of the time, but yet we want to talk missional language like we're doing something for the poor, and we want a colorblind commentary. And so that's been the kind of complex, weird stew in which evangelicals talk church and talk missional language. But at the same time, when you reduce biblical values to only marriage, abortion, and the state of Israel, and we don't at all want to talk about biblical values around racial and class and gender disparities, that's where, I think we've still got some major issues to deal with, especially in evangelicalism.
So how for a lot of people, they're like, they get the notion from the late 1960s of Sunday morning at 11 a.m. is the most segregated time in culture, and I think in some places that's probably true. And people like to think, well, let's have church come together, but aren't churches like? Let me push a little bit on this idea of it being the best place for experiment. Isn't people's lived experience in churches that you're going to have a certain value system and a certain aesthetic that happens in church for the musical style or the communication style or kind of the feel and the vibe of a place? And those become really not racial, but they become really cultural. Aren't churches really tough places to get people to expand their kind of set assumptions about, the vibe and the sound and the feel of an hour or an hour and a half long meeting?
To a large degree, that's true, even though we are seeing signs. I mean, you've experienced this at Solomon's Porch. I experienced this at Sanctuary. And there are churches that are proving around the nation and the world that you can actually have reconciliation and unity without assimilation be a major part of Christian formation in the Christian church. And I think there are other institutions and gatherings. Well, let me put it this way. Whenever people are rallied around a revolutionary, transformative cause, culture and racial division matters less and less. So you look at the Occupy movement. Race really doesn't matter there. You look at some of the revolutionary movements that have taken place in other nations around the world. I mentioned it before, but you hearken back to the civil rights movement. When the church is a religious institution, yes, it becomes conducive for people that are like each other to grow in deep community together. But when the church is about a missional cause, all of a sudden race and ethnicity and class don't matter as much.
Yeah, because it seems to me that we don't live in a world where racial distinctions are as sharp as they once were. Like, there's a lot of people who are comfortable with let's say in the African American and Anglo communities. They're really comfortable with Oprah Winfrey. They're really comfortable maybe even with Barack and Michelle Obama. They're really comfortable with Michael Jordan. They're really comfortable with like wealthy entertainers. So the racial thing, that's maybe not their place of struggle. It's a cultural shift that they have trouble with, right? Like it's not the color of one's skin, it's the content of their culture that people have a hard time with. So they're like, hey, I'm not a racist. I just don't like, the music, or I don't like the attitude, or I don't like the food, or I don't like the sound, or I don't like the smell, right? Like all the things that help us shape our lives in what it means to be a cultural person. And it feels like evangelicalism doesn't only have a racial issue. It seems like it really has a cultural issue that it's going to need to overcome. Do you think so?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, because I really do believe that the kind of racism that the United States experienced during slavery and Jim Crow segregation, we have definitely made some significant, tremendous strides past that kind of racism. I think that what we're dealing with today is, you're absolutely right. Colin Powell, Oprah Winfrey, Bill Cosby, to Kobe Bryant, to Denzel Washington, on and on and on.
Right.
I have become post-black figures in our nation. That is definitely true. I think at the same time, our issue is more about ideology differences around culture, and when we see the heat and the tension, like during political elections, you can see some of those issues come back up, and this is what I think fuels it for a certain wing of evangelicals. Because we can't get past the myth that the United States started as a Christian nation.
Oh, yeah.
Whenever evangelicals feel like their backs are against the wall because our country's about to become secular, and we start talking about this mystical Camelot Christian origin, that's when the racial heat, to me, comes back to the surface, Doug, because for many African Americans, especially those my parents and my grandparents' age, when they hear people talking about the country now post-presidential election has lost its tradition, it's lost its origin. We've lost our ability to look and go back to our Christian origin. That's when all of a sudden these racial things that we thought we had gotten past start to bubble up again. And especially when it's evangelicals saying it, because now it becomes a church issue again. And we could lose momentum when it comes to trying to dismantle the Christian church as a segregated institution.
Yeah, boy, and that's where I think you're really tapping into something, and I bet this book is pushing people's boundaries that way, because so many people in churches often will feel, especially church leaders, hey, we need to be careful that we don't allow our religious community to become overly politicized, right? Or like tap into some overly agendized perspective that a particular political party's going to have. So there's a whole bunch of things people just don't want to talk about, right? You don't want to talk about a whole range of issues. And what that tends to do then is to cause the church to be silent on those issues for some reasons that they may think are good ones. And, we certainly do at Solomon's Porch. Like, we know we have lots of people in the church that I'm part of from ranging backgrounds of things. So there's no way we're going to have consensus or want people to change their thinking on their, on their politics or the way they're going to live in the world. From an organizational standpoint, we think people's lives should influence one another, and your friendships change you more than any organizations that you're a part of. But for many churches, they've wanted to avoid that whole being overly engaged in politics. Do you feel like that's your book and these ideas are bringing this to an issue for people?
I think to a degree, and I don't have an expectation for Christians to be unified on politics. I mean, I was very grieved and discouraged with some pastors using the Sunday before the presidential election to covertly and some more overtly influence, and kind of build some kind of block of votes through their congregations. I was very grieved by that. I just think at the end of the day, that's a private decision of an American citizen who's also Christian. And I just think congregants are smarter than some pastors give them credit. And so I'm like, let them go to the polls and exercise their private right as an American citizen. At the same time, I more wish the church could be unified around issues like Trayvon Martin. That's what I'm really interested in. That there are some issues that the church can actually be a force of healing and reconciliation and compassion, mercy, and justice around. But what happens is even Trayvon Martin gets politicized, because as soon as it happens, both Rush Limbaugh and Al Sharpton have something to say about it before anybody else can process it. And so I'd like to see more the church unify around violence in North Minneapolis or South Minneapolis, or around issues of housing or the undocumented in the Twin Cities or in the Bay Area of Oakland and San Francisco, than trying to get everybody in the same political party.
And how are people taking to your book? What kind of responses are you getting from people?
So far it's been pretty positive. I don't get very many people that actually say they're against the notion of a post-black, post-white church. I think most people are trying to figure out what is the best model for them, or how do they get on the on-ramp. I mean, my role out here on the West Coast, I because I've never lived out here before, I was pretty surprised that even when you drive into, kind of the Central Valley of California, most of these small towns from Modesto down to the other side of Fresno, California, are predominantly Hispanic towns. So many of our Anglo churches know that being multi-ethnic and missional on some level has to be done. The questions I'm getting are more like, should we start with a church within a church? So should we plant a Hispanic church within our Anglo church? Should we start having a bilingual worship experience? Should we hire a Hispanic pastor? Should we build a relationship with an existing church? I think it's a matter of questions. I guess my biggest discouragement, Doug, to be honest, is not the questions or the position that many pastors are taking when I'm in conversations. I'm more concerned about the leaders who put on conferences to help the church, that you still open the brochure of a lot of these leadership conferences, these youth pastor conferences, and they still tend to be predominantly Anglo. I mean, you remember the days, Doug, when, a conference would be put on and you and I would both be there, but I would be relegated to the multi-ethnic urban track.
Right.
And so I'd be speaking to like 8 people in like a corner room, but where, our friend and brother Brian McLaren like had the main stage. And I got that then. I understood that the mainstream wasn't urban, but today, when you have so much urbanization going on, and when we know that as we get into the 2040s and 2050s, Anglos will clearly be the minority in the United States, I don't understand why urban multi-ethnic conversations are still relegated to the margins of a lot of these conferences, or that it took so long for me to be able to figure out how to get, a lot of publishing companies wanted to do a book with me. They just didn't want me to do the post-black, post-white church. They'd say, why can't you write something like what Francis Chan is writing? Come on, Efrem.
Why don't you write some European theology from Francis Chan? Everybody feels great about it. See? Even a guy named Chan thinks what Calvin thought.
Evangelicalism tends to want. They want a face of color, but they still want the theology and the content to be Anglo in nature.
Yeah, and I
know,
guess you,
so-
and I guess you're suggesting that churches should be the lead on that, because you see this in a lot of other, in a lot of the other media and a lot of the other way that we organize our lives and entertainment and everything else, right? You'll have movies that are predominantly for Anglo audiences, and then movies, Tyler Perry movies or something, which are predominantly African American audiences in them, and whole channels, the BET channel and some cable TV that'll have a much wider range, and then you'll have your classic network television that's 100% geared toward Anglo audiences, and restaurants and all this kind of stuff. And you're suggesting that churches shouldn't wait for the rest of that to change, but churches should be part of sketching out a future of a world in which we don't have the distinctions between the kind of racial assumptions within our churches. Is that right?
You're right. And you brought up a funny point. My wife Denise and I were talking the other day about how you turn on your regular primetime channels, and most of the commercials are Anglo, but then you turn on black entertainment television, and like the McDonald's commercials, all black people.
Yeah.
As if I'm going to turn on the TV and say, oh man, because LaWanda's eating a Big Mac, I really want one now. I didn't want one when Beth was having a Big Mac. I really didn't want to eat one, but you put a black woman eating a Big Mac, I really want to eat a Big Mac now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's. There's a. There are a lot of pressures in our society to sort of organize by some sort of demographics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like where you live, and then there's also this pressure which I'm sure people don't like, and that is to consider that urban always means non-white, and that urban means poor. Mm-hmm. I know that you want to comment on that, and I'm sure you do in other work that you're doing as well as in the book. Mm-hmm. That urban or African American or Hispanic or Asian doesn't translate poor people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, exactly, because the regardless of your political ideology,
mm-hmm.
the beautiful thing about on the other side of the Cosby Show, because the Cosby Show put in prime time a upper middle class, highly educated African American family,
mm-hmm.
and all of America bought into it.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if that in some ways set the stage for us to look at Barack and Michelle Obama and Sasha and Malia.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so those things are being broken down. And definitely with this economic crisis we're in, the suburbs now have urban problems.
Right.
The big problem with the suburban megachurch right now is they were built for people to come already resourced, already highly educated.
That's right.
And all they needed was programs for them.
That's right.
Now some of these megachurches, I mean, whether it's Bill Hybels or Rick Warren or John Ortberg, a lot of these churches are making staff cuts, major budget cuts, because all of a sudden they got people coming that look resourced, but they're needy now.
Yeah.
And the youth program and the small group program was not built for an unemployed, college graduate who's upside down on their house.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely tapping into something. And the changing demographics of first ring suburbs, right? Those suburbs that were built in the late 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, snugging right up to urban environments all over the country. Gentrification of the urban environment is making them very expensive places to live, and first ring suburbs are becoming increasingly inexpensive, and you see a rise in lower income people moving out of urban centers and into these outer ring, these first ring suburban centers. So we're seeing this flip now, right? Where it used to be like urban centers were wealthy people and rural folks or poor people lived in the rural areas. And then in the 1920s and 30s and 40s and 50s, that started to make a shift. And by the 50s and 60s, you had white flight out of urban centers and into the suburban world. And now they're seeing this demographic shift again, where property values in urban centers are starting to go up, and people of lower incomes of all kinds of ethnic backgrounds are moving into these first-ring suburbs, and there's these little churches there that were built in the 1950s and 1960s for, you know, the sort of first phases of the white flight that are now predominantly of particular racial backgrounds that are surrounding these churches. So those things that were happening in the 60s and 70s to the urban churches are now starting to happen to these first-ring suburb churches. So, you know, people then are confused. They're starting to move out even further.
Is there like a white person on a bullhorn that goes, "Okay, everybody to the suburbs"?
That's right.
They go, "No, everybody back to the city. Back to the city."
Yes, Efrem.
Yeah, yes, there is. Actually, there's a whole email list and stuff.
Only
now
if you're in
that
the
we
inner
get
circle.
you get it via text.
But it seems like the flexibility that has been that's forced upon any marginal community in any place, a kind of flexibility where you have to move within the dominant culture and then your marginalized culture and multiple cultures. It seems like that's part of what specially positions the African American leaders to help others during this time of growing multi-ethnic world and the growing multi-ethnic church. It seems to me like that constant exercise of navigating cultures, creating a kind of flexibility of spirit. Would you say that's true? That's part of what
I think so, and I think that's why pastors and leaders in that kind of context are the best teachers for us right now. I mean, like me personally, if I was running the leadership summit at Willow Creek, I would have had like some of the, you know, most innovative, you know, activists, you know, fruit-bearing leaders that have stood the test of time in urban context. And I would have had them speak and say, hey, if you're a leader from the suburbs or, you know, in a bedroom community or something like that, you need to listen to these leaders because they know how to weather the storm of economic winds that blow different directions and, you know, people that go from employed to unemployed and all that kind of stuff. And because I just think the same way in which, unfortunately, the East Coast was just not prepared for something like Hurricane Sandy, and New Orleans was not prepared for Katrina, a lot of our suburban churches were just not prepared for this economic storm that hit our nation.
Hey, that's Efrem Smith. The book is called The Post-Black and the Post-White Church. Efrem, thanks so much for being on the show, and thanks for the book.
Oh man, thanks, man. It's good to have been connected to you over all these years.
Yeah, but it's really good, and we'll schedule another one of these in Maui. Let's say January.
Bring in our swimsuits.
January
Doug
or February.
Pagitt Radio is coming to the beach.
Yeah, beach edition with Efrem. All right, buddy.
All right.
Hey, we'll talk with you soon.
Take care, Efrem. Thanks.
Okay, man.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, excellent conversation, don't you think? I mean, there's just some really interesting things going on in our world, and I think Efrem, you know, is a humble spirit and has some great input into that, and also knows nobody knows. Like, we're making this stuff up. This is people are off the hook.
We're writing it as we go.
Yeah, like people just don't know. All right, Doug Pagitt Radio, broadcasting live out of the Twin Cities. Hey, you know, I'm thinking about moving the show to Thursdays. Did I tell you that?
No.
How do Thursdays work? How do Thursdays work for you?
I think I could work that
Anyway,
out.
I'm thinking about Thursdays because oftentimes I talk to people when I'm having the show and they're like, I can't do Wednesdays. You know, but you know what? Maybe it's just people actually dodging me. Maybe it's people that, and I'm be like, well, then how about Thursday?
Keep moving it around. And see if
I'm sorry, I can't be on your show. I'm busy. When was that again?
Was this an easier day? Is Friday a better day?
No, there's for some people, it's like I have things Wednesdays and Friday. You know, I don't know.
Well, all you potential guests out there, you should write to Doug and let him know what day.
Yeah, please go to the Doug Pagitt page on Facebook, Doug Pagitt page,
what
just
day
like
of the
that.
week
And there's
is
a little
good
form.
For guests.
Yeah,
Good for
it's curious. So either I'm being dodged, or people do build their lives around Monday, Wednesday, Friday rhythms that are different than Tuesday, Thursday rhythm. Oh, because a couple of the people I want to have on are regular professors, and they teach, and they're like, I can't do Wednesdays.
Yeah.
See, but I think
there's something to.
I think they're just giving me the one too. All right, hey, but next week we're not going to be on Thursday because next week is Thanksgiving Day.
That's right. Are we going to be on Wednesday?
When all of America is pressured into sitting around and having a low-grade meal.
I'm
next
having
week,
Thanksgiving for the first time this year, and
at your
mine
house?
is going to be excellent, high level
turkey?
of quality.
Is it turkey?
We're smoking a turkey. We're smoking a turkey.
I mean,
and it's going to be awesome.
Turkey's like the lowest.
I know. And
I'm
going to get the best
next
out
week.
of
Doug
it.
complaining about how why we why
the man who
sandwich
doesn't cook does not get to complain
lunch.
about the meals.
I'm just suggesting that it's lunch sandwich quality. Hey, thanks for listening. We appreciate you so much for being part of the show. And we'll be back next week, Wednesday, for the Wednesday edition of Doug Pagitt Radio, broadcasting live out of the Twin Cities and on the internet on Spreaker and Ustream. So if you've listened under one medium, maybe you want to listen under the other. So go to the Doug Pagitt page on Facebook or, of course, DougPagittRadio.com. Talk to you next week. Bye.